The words followed her like a slap she could not escape. Past her prime. They had been spoken lightly, with laughter behind them, meant to humiliate, meant to remind her of her place. Vivian Fairchild stood very still as they echoed in her mind, burning deeper than any raised voice ever could. She did not yet know that those cruel words would change her life forever. She did not know that someone else had heard them, someone who would not forget. The morning light crept into the attic room of Fairchild Manor, as if it were ashamed to be there. It slipped through the small window and landed softly on Vivian's face. She woke slowly. The chill of autumn already settled deep into the thin walls. The mattress beneath her was narrow and unforgiving, the blanket worn so thin it barely warmed her skin. She rose quietly, careful not to make the floorboards creak too loudly. The household below was already awake. It always was. Vivian crossed the room to the washstand and dipped her hands into the porcelain basin. The water was cold enough to sting, but she did not flinch. Warmth was not something she expected anymore. The mirror above the basin was cracked straight through the center. Her reflection appeared broken, divided into uneven pieces. She studied it the way she did every morning, not with vanity, but with habit. 28, she thought. An age spoken in whispers when attached to an unmarried woman. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, practical and plain. Her skin was pale from long hours indoors. Fine lines touched the corners of her eyes, marks of years spent smiling politely when it was required, and swallowing words she was never allowed to say. Society had decided what those signs meant. Past her prime. She turned away from the mirror and dressed in her faded gray gown. It had once belonged to her mother. The hem was mended carefully, the fabric softened by time. It was not fashionable, but it was clean, and it was hers. Voices drifted up from below. Her stepsister Delphine's laughter rang bright and careless. Lady Constance's voice followed, sharp and commanding, already directing servants as though the day existed solely for her comfort. Vivian descended the narrow servant staircase, stepping into the warmth and polished beauty of the main house. Fairchild Manor was well kept where guests could see it. Polished wood gleamed. Fresh flowers filled the halls. Appearances mattered more than comfort ever had. The breakfast room was filled with sunlight and fine china. Lady Constance sat at the head of the table, dressed perfectly, her hair arranged without a strand out of place. Delphine lounged nearby, pretty and idle, picking at pastries Vivian had helped prepare. "There you are," Lady Constance said without looking up. "The tea is cold. Bring a fresh pot." "Yes, Lady Constance." Vivian moved quietly, her hands steady even as Delphine watched her with open amusement. "You move like a ghost," Delphine said lightly. "It's unsettling. Though I suppose at your age one does start to fade." Lady Constance smiled faintly. "She's not ancient, Delphine, merely past marriageable age. There is a difference." The words were familiar. They landed without shock now, only with a dull ache that never fully left. Vivian poured the tea and set the pot down with care. "It's kind of us to keep her," Delphine continued. "No prospects, no dowry. Where else would she go?" Vivian kept her eyes lowered. "I am grateful," she said quietly. Lady Constance finally looked at her then. "You are plain, Vivian, accepting that truth is kinder than false hope. Hope only brings disappointment, and you have had quite enough of that." "Yes, Lady Constance." There was nothing else to say. She was dismissed with a wave and sent to clear dishes that servants should have handled. When she was finished, she slipped away to the one place in the house where she was allowed to exist without comment. The library. It was modest compared to grand estates, but to Vivian it felt endless. Shelves rose to the ceiling, filled with books her father had collected over a lifetime. Philosophy, history, poetry. Ideas too large for the narrow life she had been given. She closed the door and breathed. Here she was not a spinster or a burden. Here she was a mind. She selected a book and settled into the worn chair by the window, losing herself in words that spoke of dignity, purpose, and worth. If she could not be wanted, she had decided long ago, she would at least be useful. In books, she could live lives denied to her. A sharp knock broke her focus. The butler stood in the doorway holding a thick envelope sealed in wax. "This arrived for Lady Constance," he said, "from Alden Estate." Vivian's fingers tightened slightly as she took it. She recognized the quality at once. Alden Estate meant one thing: the Duke. Lady Constance and Delphine were already discussing gowns when Vivian entered the morning room. Lady Constance broke the seal and read, her expression changing with each line. "It's an invitation," Delphine squealed. "The Duke's grand ball." Lady Constance's eyes gleamed. "We must prepare at once." Vivian turned to leave, but Lady Constance stopped her. "You will attend as well." Vivian blinked in surprise. "I will?" "As Delphine's companion," Lady Constance said coolly. "You will make her shine brighter by comparison." Understanding settled like ice in Vivian's chest. She was not invited. She was displayed. That night, alone in her attic room, Vivian opened an old trunk that had belonged to her mother. Beneath folded linens lay a burgundy gown, rich with age and memory. It was unfashionable, yes, but beautiful. She held it up, imagining small changes, careful stitches. It would still be old. It would still mark her as different, but it would be hers. The next evening, as Fairchild Manor prepared for the ball, Vivian worked until her fingers ached, altering the gown with quiet determination. When she finally looked at herself in the cracked mirror, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. For one brief moment, she saw not a woman past her prime, but a woman who deserved more. The moment did not last. "Vivian," Delphine called sharply, "come help me with my hair." The mirror showed her reflection break again. Tomorrow she would attend the ball. Tomorrow she would stand in the shadows. Tomorrow she would be exactly what they expected. She did not know that tomorrow someone would see her. The carriage rolled through the iron gates of Alden Estate as dusk settled into night. Lanterns lined the drive, casting warm light over manicured lawns and towering stone walls. Vivian sat quietly inside, hands folded in her lap, while Delphine filled the space with excited chatter about dances, gowns, and which young ladies might attract the Duke's attention. Lady Constance adjusted Delphine's shawl with sharp precision. "Remember," she said, "you are here to be noticed. Vivian is here to stand beside you and remind everyone how fortunate you are." Vivian nodded without speaking. When the carriage stopped, the music drifted out to greet them. Laughter, strings, and voices rose together in a sound that belonged to another world. A footman opened the door, and Vivian stepped down onto the gravel, lifting her skirts carefully. Alden Estate glowed like something unreal. Light spilled from every window, and the grand doors stood open as if inviting the entire world inside. For a moment, Vivian forgot to breathe. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers burned bright above polished floors. Gowns in every color moved through the space like living jewels. Conversations hummed with ambition, expectation, and careful calculation. Lady Constance immediately guided Delphine into the crowd. Vivian followed, invisible as instructed, holding shawls and gloves, standing half a step behind. Then the room shifted. A hush rolled outward, subtle but unmistakable. Heads turned toward the staircase. The Duke had arrived. William Alden descended slowly, his presence commanding without effort. He wore black evening clothes cut perfectly to his frame, his dark hair neat, his expression controlled and unreadable. He did not smile as he greeted his guests, but he did not need to. Power settled around him like a second skin. Vivian watched from the edge of the room. He looked nothing like the romantic heroes of novels. He looked like a man who carried weight, responsibility, and solitude in equal measure. The dances began. Young women were presented to him, one after another. He danced politely, flawlessly, listening with distant courtesy. Mothers watched with sharp eyes. Daughters smiled too brightly. Each turn of the waltz felt like an examination. Vivian told herself not to look, yet her gaze kept finding him, not because she hoped. Hope had been trained out of her long ago, but because something about him felt familiar. The way he stood apart, even while surrounded, the way his eyes held a quiet distance. Between dances, his gaze swept the room. It passed over Vivian once, then returned. For a brief, impossible moment, their eyes met. Vivian felt it like a sudden pull in her chest. His look was not dismissive, not curious in the shallow way men sometimes looked at women. It was searching, as if he were trying to understand something he had not expected to find. Then someone spoke to him, and the moment broke. She exhaled slowly, certain she had imagined it. The evening wore on, and Delphine grew bolder. She gathered a small group of young ladies near one of the mirrored walls, their laughter loud enough to draw attention. Vivian stood just behind them. "Oh, Delphine," one girl said, glancing at Vivian. "Is that your cousin?" "Stepsister," Delphine corrected, her voice clear and amused. "She lives with us." "How old is she?" another asked. Delphine smiled sweetly. 28. The laughter came easily. "Past her prime," Delphine said lightly. "Poor thing. But Mama says it's charity to keep her. No one else would have her." The words struck like ice water. Vivian felt the heat rush to her face, but she did not move. She did not speak. She held herself still, as she always did, letting the moment pass over her, like a storm she had survived too many times before. What she did not see was the Duke standing only a few steps away, partially hidden by a column. He heard every word. William's jaw tightened as the laughter rippled outward. He watched Vivian's face as the cruelty landed. He saw the slight tremor she forced into stillness. He saw her straighten, dignity intact, and turn away without a word. Something in him shifted. He had watched ambition all evening. He had watched practiced smiles and eager glances, but he had not seen grace until that moment. Without thinking, he followed. Vivian stepped into a quiet alcove near the library doors, pressing her hand lightly against her chest as if steadying herself. She did not cry. She would not cry here. "You have nothing to apologize for." The voice came from behind her. She turned, startled, and found herself facing the Duke. "Your Grace," she said quickly, curtsying despite her shaking hands. "I did not mean to intrude." "You did not," he said firmly. "I heard what was said." Her eyes dropped. "It is nothing new." "That does not make it acceptable." She looked up then, surprised by the sharpness in his tone. For the first time that evening, his expression was not distant. It was focused, intent. "May I have this dance?" he asked, holding out his hand. Vivian stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "Your Grace, I am not invited to dance. I am only a companion." "You are a guest in my house," he replied. "That is invitation enough." The ballroom seemed to still as he led her onto the floor. Conversations faltered. Eyes followed them. The music began. Vivian's hand trembled in his, but she knew the steps. She had learned them long ago, even if she had never been chosen to use them. William guided her with quiet confidence, adjusting when she hesitated, never making her feel wrong. "You carry yourself well," he said softly. "I have had much practice," she replied. He studied her face, the strength beneath her composure, the intelligence in her eyes. He had not expected this woman. Society had hidden her too well. When the dance ended, he bowed to her with respect that left her breathless. "Thank you, Lady Vivian." He turned away without another word, leaving behind a room buzzing with confusion and whispers. William did not return to the ballroom. Instead, he went straight to his study. The fire burned low as he stood before his desk, hands braced against its polished surface. The image of Vivian's face would not leave him. Not the humiliation, the strength. He rang for his secretary. "I need the royal registry documents," William said when the man arrived. The secretary stared. "Your Grace, those records have not been used in decades." "I am aware," William replied. "Bring them." The parchment was laid before him. The law was old, rarely invoked, but still valid. A duke could declare an intent to marry, legally binding, before witnesses. William did not hesitate. He dipped his pen and wrote her name, Lady Vivian Fairchild. When the wax seal pressed into place, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Certainty. As dawn approached, Vivian lay awake in her attic room, staring at the ceiling. The Duke's voice echoed in her mind. The way he had looked at her, the way he had chosen her, if only for a dance. It had meant nothing, she told herself. Men like him did not choose women like her. She did not know that at first light a carriage would arrive. She did not know that her name had already been written into her future, and she did not know that her life was about to be torn open and remade in a way she could never have imagined. The knock came just after sunrise. It was sharp, official, and loud enough to echo through Fairchild Manor. Vivian was already awake, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, her thoughts still tangled in the memory of the ball. The knock came again, firmer this time. Below, footsteps hurried. Voices murmured in confusion. Vivian descended the servants' stairs slowly, her heart pounding without knowing why. When she entered the front hall, she saw a man in dark livery standing straight as stone. The crest on his coat was unmistakable. Alden. Lady Constance rushed forward, her face pale with shock. "What is this?" she demanded. The man bowed slightly. "I am here with formal notice from His Grace the Duke of Alden." His eyes moved, then settled on Vivian. "Lady Vivian Fairchild." Her breath caught. "Yes," she said. He held out a sealed document. "By authority of the Royal Registry, your name has been entered as the intended bride of His Grace. You are requested to present yourself at Alden Estate this afternoon." The room went silent. Delphine let out a sharp laugh. "This is some kind of mistake." Lady Constance snatched the paper, reading it twice, then a third time. Her hands began to shake. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You have done something." She snapped at Vivian. "What did you do?"
"I did nothing," Vivian said honestly.
"I danced with him once. That is all." Delphine's face twisted with disbelief and fury. "He pitied you," she said cruelly. "That is all this is. Pity." The word cut deep because it echoed Vivian's own fear. The carriage arrived before noon. Lady Constance gave her orders quickly, sharply. Vivian was dressed not in finery, but in something plain and respectable. There was no warmth in her stepmother's eyes, only calculation. "If you embarrass us," Lady Constance said coldly, "do not return." The ride to Alden Estate felt unreal. Vivian sat alone, hands clenched in her lap, staring out at fields she had never imagined crossing. Her mind raced with questions she had no answers for. Why would he do this? What does he want from me? What if Delphine is right? Alden Estate rose before her, even more imposing in daylight. Marble halls, tall windows, everything spoke of power and certainty, and she felt very small as she was shown into a quiet blue drawing room. William entered moments later. He did not look like the distant Duke of the ballroom. He looked tense, uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of something he could not undo. "Lady Vivian," he said, "I imagine you have questions." "I do," she replied, finding her voice. "Your Grace, I must ask plainly. Why have you done this?" He held her gaze. "Because I saw injustice, and I chose not to ignore it." "That is not enough," she said, her courage rising. "Is this pity?" The word hung between them. William shook his head. "No, it is choice. You do not know me." "I know what I saw," he replied. "A woman treated cruelly who refused to become cruel herself." She folded her hands tightly. "This law binds me without my consent." His expression tightened. "You are right. That was wrong of me." Her breath caught at his honesty. "I will not force you," he continued. "Stay 1 week. If, at the end, you wish to leave, I will dissolve the registry." For the first time, someone was offering her a choice. She stayed. The days that followed were unlike anything Vivian had known. She was given space, respect, and quiet freedom. She explored the vast library, where William found her one morning deep in a book on political thought. "You read this?" he said with surprise. "I have read much," she replied. They talked then, truly talked. About ideas, about responsibility, about the weight of expectation. Vivian forgot to be careful. William forgot to be distant. For the first time in years, he laughed, but fear followed her still. Letters came from Fairchild Manor, sharp with warning and threat. Gossip spread quickly. Whispers of scandal, of a spinster trapping a duke. When Vivian faltered, William defended her without hesitation. When he became cold and controlling under pressure, she confronted him. "I will not live in another cage," she told him. The words struck him harder than any accusation ever had. He apologized, not as a duke, as a man. On the 7th day, Lady Constance arrived uninvited, fury barely contained. She accused, she insulted. She tried to reclaim control. William ended it. He exposed their cruelty, their manipulation, and banished them from his estate with a voice that left no room for argument. When they were gone, Vivian broke. Years of humiliation poured out in silent tears. William knelt before her, holding her hands, speaking the truth he had never spoken aloud. He told her about his father, about the woman he had loved and let go, about the walls he had built to survive. "You reminded me how to feel," he said. "You reminded me that duty without love is only existence." Then he asked her, not as a duke, but as William, "Marry me, not because of law or obligation, because you choose me." Vivian saw him then, truly saw him. And for the first time in her life, she chose herself. "Yes," she said. "I choose you." Their wedding was held at Alden Estate. It was public, deliberate, and proud. William wanted the world to see that this marriage was not a secret, not a shame. Vivian walked down the aisle with her head high. She did not look for Lady Constance or Delphine, but she knew they were there, watching. It no longer mattered. She stood beside William as his equal. When society tested her, she answered with calm strength. When whispers followed, she did not flinch. She was no longer invisible. That evening, as they danced in the same ballroom where she had once stood in shadows, Vivian understood the truth. She had never been past her prime. She had only been unseen. And the Duke had seen her, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Together, they rewrote the story that had been written for them both, and in doing so, they proved that dignity, once claimed, could never be taken again.